Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Listen with Vobes. I'm Richard Vobes. It's 4 o'clock here, just coming up to in the UK, and we are continuing with our book, the book by Norman Collins, London Belongs to Me, and very much looking forward to another reading. Just having a cup of tea as I read to thee. Hello to the lovely Julia, to TurboStream, to Justine Jones, to Zom, I beg your pardon, Coco, Steve G, Billabong O'Neill, Dave Ivad, Mark Burgess, Jen Coley, Sensible Paul. Good afternoon, Richard and Julia. Quieter tonight with Richard last night on the Vobe show. You seem to have a quieter. And Michael White and Oily the Squid and Lee Lawson. And thank you to Mark for your generous donation, by the way. That's very, very kind of you. I have sent you an email. I haven't checked my email since I've been out filming. The lovely Julia and I went out filming. I've posted some pictures on the Bald Explorer page and the Facebook group, just in case you want to catch up with what we've been up to. And the video will be out tomorrow morning. Dudley Sawyer is here as well. It's just come up to the hour. Now, if you remember rightly in the story, Connie had gone to work and there had been a raid at the club in Dorset Road, is it? I can't remember which one, where it was now, somewhere in London, Dorset Street or something. And the police had arrested everybody and they'd taken them back to the police station in Black Mariah's. It's all very, all very exciting. So, yeah. Cheers. So they that's right, they were all led inside. That's where we got to. So let's carry on. Once inside, there was a distempered unhomeliness which is peculiar to police stations. Against the setting of the dark green paint, the white waistcoats of the men and the evening frocks of the ladies showed up startlingly. Immediately in front of Connie in the queue was a tall young man with vague purplish pouches under his eyes and a straggle of honey-coloured moustache across his upper lip. He was the peer's nephew, and his companion, a dark, melancholy-looking girl with green fingernails. "Frightful bore, this," the young man said, whenever he caught her eye. "Can we smoke?" the girl asked. "Not a hope," the young man answered. "Frightful bore, I'm afraid." "How long shall we be here?" It was her first raid, and she felt tired. "Oh, hours, probably," the young man answered. "They've got to write down all our names and addresses. They're always frightfully slow. Can't really write, you know. Frightful bore, waiting." "Can we go home, then?" "Oh, yes, rather. We'll be released on bail." "Can you arrange it, or do you have to get Daddy's solicitor?" "Oh, I'll fix it. Bit of a bore, but it's nothing, really. Provided we're both here in the morning. It doesn't really cost anything." "But I'm meeting Mummy in the morning. She's coming up specially." "Oh, you'll have to put her off, I'm afraid," the young man comforted her. "Frightful bore. Don't know why we had to go there. Too sickening that they should have chosen that one. Frightful bore, all this, I'm afraid." What a frightfully boring young man he is. It's the money, you see. It's the money. Good afternoon to Linda Kane, who is ironing. If I'd have known that, I would have sent you a pile of shirts. Connie despised the dark, melancholy-looking girl because, in the way of the world, she seemed no better than half-witted. But she liked the perfume that she was wearing, and she kept coming up close to have sniffs at it. When the girl found out what was happening and looked round to find Connie's little withered face pressed up against her collar and the old nostrils distended like a horse's, she gave a little grimace and took half a step forward. But they were parked too close for easy movement, and a little shudder, half jolt, half ripple, passed right along the line of arrested revellers, as though a shunting engine had buttered into the back of a goods train. After this rebuff, Connie spent her time discreetly going over the contents of her Moir handbag, just to be sure there was nothing in it that she would have preferred the police not to question her about. But it was all right. Everything in the bag was hers. The queue got smaller and smaller, and Connie was finally brought face to face with the sergeant. He was still scratching away in his book like the recording angel. One after another, the gentlemen in evening dress had put a price on their own head and on the head of the lady who was with them, and one or two of the ladies, who were without companions, had opened up their sequin pouches and produced a visiting card. Of course, there was always some who had earlier in the evening made Mr. Verisetti a present of most of the ready money they'd started with, and there had to be a bit of telephoning. Taxicabs kept arriving with surprised friends arranging to go to bail. Then Connie's turn came. "Name?" said the sergeant. It was the 47th name that he'd written down, and he'd given up saying please. "Victoria Regina Coke," Connie told him. It was her real name that she was giving. Connie was only a pet name that she'd given herself because Victoria Regina had seemed a bit too formal among friends. Also, it went well with Coke. Connie Coke. It's a good name, isn't it? Address: 10 Dulcimer Street, SE11. Occupation: Connie disliked everything about the sergeant. He was large, disinterested and foxy-featured, and she wondered if he would have behaved in that off-hand manner if she'd been the one with the pen in her hand and had been standing against the rail almost up to his chin. "Hostess," she said, firmly. The sergeant wrote it down without raising an eyebrow. "Anyone to go surety for you?" Connie drew herself up and flashed her little yellow teeth at him. "I go surety for myself, thank you," she said, and handed the bag across to him. The sergeant opened it, took one glance at the broken comb, the matchbox and the cigarette ends in it, the chipped mirror, the bus tickets, and began counting out the odd coins. "Only 3 and 8 in here," he said. "There was a £5 note when you had it," she said. "Want to make a charge?" the sergeant demanded, leaning forward across the desk. Connie shook her head. "No use," she said. "I may have spent it at my milliner's." "Anyone you can phone up?" he asked. Connie thought for a moment. "Only the Lord Mayor," she answered, "and he's probably in bed." "Then I'll have to keep you here, Mum," he told her. "Who are you calling Mum?" Connie demanded. But he ignored her. He raised his hand and beckoned to one of the waiting policemen. "Down below," he said. "Look slippy." Connie avoided the constable's arm and went off in a kind of mincing, tripping walk that was meant to convey light-heartedness. But on the way, one of the green-painted doors down the bleak corridor opened and Mr. Verisetti appeared. He had been taken into one of the private rooms for questioning. Connie greeted him eagerly. "Oh, sir," she said, "I've come out without any small change and they won't let me go. I don't want to spend the night in a cell with my rheumatism." But Mr. Verisetti was too much agitated to take any notice of her. "Get out of my way," he said to Connie, and turning to the inspector, he resumed the conversation where he had left off. "I admit nothing," he declared loudly. "You are not so clever as you think. In the morning you're to find out I will grill you. You will be ruined." And with that, Mr. Verisetti, his own surety in £50, went out into the night, and Connie went down into the cells. She spent her time demanding rugs, a hot water bottle, a light over her bed, privacy, an aspirin, something to drink, and a Bible. She said that she wanted the Bible to kill the miscellaneous vermin with which she so threatened to tell the magistrate in the morning. The cell was swarming. But her real anxiety was for Duke. It was because of him that she cried. Ah, poor old Connie. Poor old Connie. You can imagine that there were women like that, and probably still are. I don't really understand the surety bit. Presumably they're paying, are they? They're paying like a bail to get out, so that they... Is it like they pay the money and they can collect the money the next day? Does anybody know how that system used to work? I'm sure Mr. Sadler does. He's probably been the sort of reckless person who's at nightclubs in the 1930s and 40s who was taken in by the police, raided, and then had to pay surety. I'm sure he was. Anyway, we come to the end of that section. In the half-light of the basement, a more extravagant woman... Oh, sorry, let me read that again. In the half-light of the basement, a more extravagant woman would have lit the gas by now. Mrs. Vizzard was seated at the mahogany dining room table, going over her budget. There was everything set out there in the smallest and minutest detail. Fish, 4p. Stamp, penny, halfpenny. Milk, 3p. Tea, 7p. Soap powder, 2p. Halfpenny. Pair of quarter rubbers, 9p. Beetroot, 3p. Her eyes fixed themselves in a frightened stare as she gazed at the figures. It was terrifying, positively terrifying, the way things mounted up. Money seemed to be slipping from her all the time. With a sick feeling of alarm, she remembered the lease. 18 years. It wasn't long, was it? And after that? She shuddered at the thought of it, and returned to the column of household expenses in front of her. The beetroot, for instance. That had simply been a piece of idle indulgence. She could perfectly well have done without beetroot. The bell of the spring bracket outside the door suddenly began pealing, and Mrs. Vizzard started. For some reason it alarmed her. She caught her breath and sat there for a moment without moving. By the time she had recovered herself and got up the stairs, the rusted wires were already scraping once more on their pulleys, and the bell was beginning to ring again. Mrs. Vizzard quickened her pace, but she was taking no chances. Before she laid a finger on the doorknob, she made sure that the safety latch was in place, and she'd put down the lid of the letterbox in as an additional precaution so that nothing could be thrust at her from the outside. Then, having flattened out the corner of the doormat that always jammed the door when it was opened, she turned the handle. It was not yet quite dark, and in any case a street lamp was only just opposite. It threw a pool of milky light over the doorstep. Standing there in the cold was a man, a rather unusual-looking man. He wore a broad black hat like a priest's, or an actor's, and a heavy overcoat that was too large for him. It hung straight down almost to his ankles. On the step of either side of him were two battered, dumpy suitcases. Mrs. Vizzard sized him up at a glance and judged him to be trying to sell her something. She made ready to close the door again. But the man on the doorstep was speaking. "You have a room to let?" he asked, vaguely, in a faint, hollow-sounding voice. "A furnished room, I believe?" Mrs. Vizzard kept the door half open. She was undecided, horribly undecided. What she'd been looking forward to was having a young single businessman. It was, in fact, what she had specified in the advertisement. The man on the doorstep might have been single, but he certainly didn't look businesslike. There was an indefinable suggestion of mothballs and the rag bag about him. But at least his voice sounded educated and refined. It was even possible that he might be a gentleman. "You saw my advertisement?" she asked, non-committally. The broad black hat stirred in silhouette. "The advertisement? Yes, of course, the advertisement." The voice under the hat was hesitant and unassured. It was almost as if, having actually come to the house in search of lodgings, that he, at that moment, was thinking of something else. Mrs. Vizzard pursed her lips. She had to admit that she didn't like the look of the man, but she couldn't keep him waiting on the doorstep indefinitely. And that back-room basement, unlet and unearning, was a constant reproach to her. "Would you like to see the room?" she asked. The black hat nodded. "Thank you," the man said. "Thank you very much." When the safety chain was undone, he followed her into the hall and put his bags down against the small bamboo table that supported the fern. The bags collapsed inwards upon themselves as soon as he let go of them, as though there was practically nothing in them. "It's downstairs," Mrs. Vizzard said grimly. "If you wait here, I'll go and put the light on." It was not only thoughtfulness that made her do this. She wanted to keep a safe distance between herself and the stranger until she knew a bit more about him. It wouldn't have been the first time that defenceless elderly ladies have been slugged onto their own back stairs. When she'd lit the gas, she called out to him to come down. She had half hoped that he might be disinterested when he found the room was downstairs, but the man gave no hint of minding. He followed her as though he had been going down basement stairs all his life. The room, even with the gas lit, was scarcely cheerful. The bamboo table in the hall upstairs was only a small side shoot of the original bamboo forest that had sprouted in the basement. Everything down here was mottled, banana-coloured bamboo. There was another occasional table, with a red-fringed cloth spread cornerwise, obscuring most of the little criss-cross pieces, but under the cloth the tell-tale ridge of the wood showed unmistakably. There was a bamboo wardrobe, ingeniously strengthened with angle brackets, also of bamboo. There was a bamboo washstand. There was a wicker and bamboo easy chair that sagged suggestively as though very fat men had been sitting in it for years. And there was a bamboo shell overmantel. The bed was the one entirely bamboo-less object in the room. It was of iron and brass, and set with its casters in separate glass bowls, either to save the oilcloth or because, with so much bamboo about, Mrs. Vizzard had unconsciously grown to fear of the depredations of white ants. But the stranger scarcely seemed to notice the furnishings. "Thank you," he said, in the same hollow voice that she had noticed on the doorstep. "Thank you very much." Down here, between four walls, it sounded more hollow than ever. It was like reverberation in a vault. "You mean you like the room?" Mrs. Vizzard asked. She was frankly incredulous. In all her years of experience in letting, she had never known anyone like the room before. "Thank you," the stranger said again. But this was too easy. It revived all her suspicions. "You know the rent?" she asked. The rent. Ah, yes, the rent. Again, it was as though the man was mysteriously thinking of something else, as though he wasn't paying proper attention to what was going on. He passed a limp hand that carried a long frayed cuff with it across his forehead, and seemed to recover himself in a little. 10 shillings a week, I think the advertisement said, he added. Without service. Without service? And in advance, Mrs. Vizzard reminded him. There had been nothing in the advertisement about paying in advance, but the stranger didn't seem to mind. In advance, he replied. Yes, of course, in advance. With references, Mrs. Vizzard added meaningly. The stranger was silent for a moment. The limp hand and the frayed cuff straggled across the forehead again. Would rather an old one do? He asked apologetically. You see, I've been moving about a lot lately. When do you intend to come? Mrs. Vizzard asked. Intend to come? The stranger gave a little laugh that sounded more hollow than his voice. Oh, I've come, he said. I shan't be going away again. He unbuttoned his coat and drew out an envelope containing 2 £1 notes. He handed them to her. For a fortnight, he said again. A fortnight in advance. Mrs. Vizzard hesitated. While the stranger had been standing there, Mrs. Vizzard had been inspecting him. It wasn't merely that his coat was long, it was the ghost of a coat that had once been magnificent. A complicated, brocaded arrangement of frogs ran down the front of it, and the collar was of astrakhan. The buttons had once been covered in the same material as the coat itself, but these had worn threadbare by now, leaving only a pattern of small wooden discs. But now that his hat was off and it was his face that fascinated her. It was a swarthy, dusky face, almost like an Indian's. Under the eyes there were 2 half-moons that were faintly bluish, but the eyes themselves were dark and brilliant. Like mesmerist's eyes, Mrs. Vizzard told herself, the sort of eyes that could hypnotise you and make you do things you didn't want to. Across the stranger's forehead a lock of lank black hair fell forward. Mrs. Vizzard shivered slightly. She was aware that the man was smiling at her. Slowly, she stretched out her hand for the note, and the fingers closed on it. It crackled authentically, and she felt temporarily reassured. Are you connected with the stage? She asked. The stage? The stranger shook his head. No, I'm not. I am quite unconnected with the stage, he assured her. And will you be out all day? No, he answered, the dark eyes still smiling at her. I shall be in, all day. Mrs. Vizzard began backing towards the door. She wanted to shut it between him and her, and then decide what to do. Call the police would be a sensible thing, get rid of him before he could make trouble. But on what evidence? The police wouldn't arrest a man for answering an advertisement or offering to pay his rent in advance. So she tried to keep her head and be businesslike. With her hand on the doorknob, somehow the very feel of the thing gave her confidence, she raised her eyes to him again. The name, she said, I didn't catch it. I didn't give it to you, he answered. It's Squales. Squales. Henry Squales. And now, if you will permit me, I will get my bags and unpack. Back in her own living room, under the portrait of the departed Mr. Vizzard, Mrs. Vizzard shut the door and locked it. She felt safer that way, but not much safer. The newcomer was too near to her in the back room for her to feel safe altogether. Suppose he tries to hypnotise me through the brickwork, she asked herself, or taps on the wall at night when everybody else is asleep, or bores holes in the skirting and spies on me. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. It was followed by footsteps, quick, authentic ones, mounting the stairs 2 at a time. She recognised them at once. They were Percy's. He was bolting upstairs to his old mum just the way a good son should. Then she heard another door upstairs bang, and she knew that he was home. She always liked the lad, and now she was positively glad of him. It was comforting to have anyone so strong and vigorous around the place. She glanced towards the wall that separated her from the back room. Behind the wall she could hear the man moving about, shifting things. The old feeling of timidity returned to her, and she shuddered. I hope I've done the right thing, she told herself. It wouldn't surprise me to find that we've got a murderer here. A murderer at number 10. We'll pause there for a moment. That's one of my favourite moments in the book, and of course in the film, because Henry Squales, is played by Alistair Sim, and Alistair Sim is just so brilliantly cast. And I remember reading the book, and then I saw the film, and he's so brilliantly cast. Oh gosh, that's really good. We will carry on. I'm just having a moment. That was really good. It sounds like a Bond, says Mark Burgess. I've been listening to Howling Wolf, Julia. That too is fab. I don't know what Howling Wolf is. Anne A says, darn, I'm a bit late having internet connections. I hope we're not buffering anything. Swarthy. Don't often hear that one. No, that's true. He sounds like a wrong 'un, says TurboStream. Well, I'm just trying to think, really. I don't know that there's a wrong 'un as such in all of them, now that I think about it. But they're all genuine of themselves, and they do things. I mean, he's so clever. I think this must have been the pinnacle of his books, of his writing. Norman Collins. For me anyway, he certainly encapsulates it. It is an amazing book. Right. Anyway, sorry about that. I just needed a couple of moments. We're now on the next section of this chapter. And what about Connie? How's she been getting on? Lummy. She didn't half have a time of it at Vine Street. It wasn't no bed of roses being shut up in that cell wandering about Duke all night. And she didn't exactly look her best when she came before the Beak in the morning. By the time she got a mug of the police station tea at breakfast, she wasn't much more than yesterday's buttonhole. But she wasn't going to have a lot of flatties putting anything over her, not likely. That's why she kept on insisting on her rights, just to show them that she was a human being and not some kind of a horse. First of all, she told them she wanted a chair, and when they asked her why, she said mysteriously that it was because of her condition. Then she wanted to report the night warders for sticking her nose up against the grill of the cell door and making faces at her every time that she'd been dropping off to sleep. Nothing came of that complaint, but it was funny while it lasted, and it established her. She spoke in a carrying sort of voice, and everyone who was waiting to go up into the courtroom could hear her. She was the life and soul of the party downstairs. You just ask the sergeant to step along this way, she began. Again, after a pause. Tell him that I was at college with his sister, and if he's having a quick one, I'll send the inspector. The good-looking one, tell him it's a matter of life and death, but don't say who for, and if he doesn't come, say I'll report him to the magistrate. If you think that was tea you gave me just now, someone's been robbing you. There's a lot going on around here that needs showing up. If you'll give me 5 minutes... if you'll give me 5 minutes by my gold wristwatch... And if no... Well, hang on. I'll give you 5 minutes by my gold wristwatch, and if nobody's been to see me by then... ... But the constable outside didn't even let her finish. He opened the cell door and waited there. Come along, he said. We're ready for you. About time, too, Connie answered, and joined the little queue that was going upstairs. They went through the narrow oak door that led to the court, and it was then that Connie had her first big disappointment. She'd been rather looking forward to being a member of the big happy family, all peers and stockbrokers and pretty ladies, with Mr. Verisetti himself, the dirty eye-tie, as the centre of the piece. She hadn't half been waiting to see him get it in the neck from someone without being able to answer back. But apparently that part of the circus was already over, leaving Rex versus Victoria Regina... Oh, goodness sake, Mobes. But apparently that part of the circus was over, leaving Rex versus Victoria Regina Coke to come on separately. It was flattering, but not so friendly. Just to keep her spirits up, she had a good look round the court while they were getting things ready. It would have been nice to have seen even one friendly face in that crowd, but she couldn't find one. She'd never seen a more awful-looking lot of dials in all her life. The policemen all looked hot and beefy, as policemen always do without their helmets on, and the other people in the body of the court might have been borrowed from a mortuary. Her second big disappointment was the magistrate. He wasn't the regular one, and that made things more chilly and impersonal. There had been a time during Connie's gay period when the magistrate had been like an old friend to her. Rather a spiteful and vindictive one at times, but still friendly. Whereas this cheesy-looking man on the bench might have been an elderly dentist. He didn't look as if he could be a friend even to himself. I wonder if anyone at number 10 had noticed that poor old Connie didn't get back last night, she was thinking again. I wonder if Jukes had his water changed. Then the usher called her name, and she went into the box. The magistrate and his clerk had a whispering conversation, and then the clerk very rapidly began intoning. Charged with the obstruction of police in the performance of their duties, in that she did switch off the... Oh, I never! Connie exclaimed. The magistrate took one glance in Connie's direction and told her to keep quiet. Her turn would come in a minute, he said. From his voice, he seemed a quiet, unemotional sort of man. When the police entered, with the intention of impeding them all in their lawful duties. The magistrate looked at his fingernails for a moment and then turned to her again. Do you plead guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, my lord, Connie answered. It's a lie. Call the inspector. The big young man, like a mooncalf, was called. He took the oath with an expertness that left Connie aghast. Give your evidence, the magistrate ordered him. At 11:30, in accordance with my instructions, he said, almost as though he'd spent the earlier part of that morning in learning the part, I visited Moonraker's club and secured entry. Alcoholic liquors were being served, and in the inner room card games were in progress. Yes, we've heard all of that, the magistrate interrupted. We've heard all of that. But the moon calf didn't seem to be in the least put off by the interruption. Still in the same over-rehearsed monotone, he continued, "At 12:05, as ordered, I rose from the table and opened the window so that my police whistle could be heard outside. The prisoner then appeared from a side passage marked Cloaks and operated the light switch connected with the mains. In the darkness, a member of those present attempted to escape." "You're quite sure it was this woman?" the magistrate asked. The policeman took one look at Connie. "Quite sure, sir," he said. It was her turn now. The usher handed her a Bible, and she took it with the easy nonchalance of someone who is used to Bibles. "The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God," she said, speaking almost as fast as the inspector. The magistrate looked even harder at Connie than the policeman had done. He was, in fact, staring at her so hard that Connie felt uncomfortable. Because he was staring, she began shifting from one foot to the other. "Is the prisoner sitting, down, or standing?" the magistrate asked at last. The policeman who handed Connie the Bible answered for her. "She's standing, sir," he said. The magistrate, however, appeared unconvinced. "She seems very short," he remarked resentfully. "I can scarcely see her." For a moment he regarded his fingernails again. Then he turned to Connie again. "You have heard the evidence," he said. "Have you anything to say?" "Only that it's a lie, sir." "You mean that you didn't turn off the electric light switch?" "Not deliberately." "Then how did you turn it off?" "I slipped." There was a titter from the public gallery when Connie said this. The magistrate removed his horn-rimmed glasses and placed them on the desk in front of him. "This is a court of justice, not a pantomime," he observed in the same cold, lifeless voice. "If I hear more laughter, I shall order the court to be cleared. I am frequently amazed that there should be so many idle persons who apparently have nothing better to do than to sit in court deriving merriment from the misfortunes of others." The magistrate, who was quite famous for that kind of thing, waited long enough for the reporters to get down his saying of the week correctly, and then assumed. I am expected to believe that suggestion about slipping, he asked. "It's God's truth, sir," Connie answered. The fact did not seem to impress him unduly. "I trust it is all God's truth that I'm hearing," he said. "You have been on oath ever since you entered the box, remember?" "I'll remember, sir," Connie said contritely. The magistrate replaced his glasses and contemplated her solemnly. "And what did you do with your arms when you were falling?" Connie thought for a moment. "I held them in front of me to break my fall," she said. "Do you remember what it was you fell over?" Connie thought again. She felt there was a catch in it somewhere. My feet, sir," she replied at last. At the reply, a titter started up in the body of the court, but the usher was up on his toes already, and the laughter died away before it had really become anything. As for Connie, the magistrate appeared to be satisfied with her for the moment. He asked her to stand down and invited the moon calf into the box again. "How high on the wall is the switch?" he asked. 7 foot 8 inches, your worship," he answered. That was all from him, for the magistrate called Connie once more, and it was to be the last time he would worry her. "How tall are you?" he asked. 5'1", sir," she told him. "Yet you invite me to believe that in falling you became entangled with the electric light switch nearly a yard above your head?" He paused. "Even if you had extended your arms to their full length, it would still have been a remarkable coincidence if you had worked the switch. It must, in fact, have been either a very extraordinary switch or a very extraordinary slip. But your arms were not extended above your head, you say. On the contrary, your own oath, you say, that they were held in front of you to break your fall. In the circumstances, I can only conclude that you did turn out the light. Possibly it was before your fall. Indeed, your fall may have been the result of putting out the light. Silly old buzzard going on about my fall, Connie was thinking. They go on about anything you tell them. But the magistrate was still speaking. There is nothing in the evidence to show why you extinguished the light, he continued. I will conclude that you did so under instructions. 14 days. The magistrate had removed his glasses and was sitting back once more. The bench, in fact, was now feeling a bit peckish and was just about to go off to the club to have its lunch. But Connie had not moved. 14 days, she said, incredulously. 14 days, the usher repeated and tapped her on the shoulder. But I've got a dependent, she said. I can't leave him. The magistrate regarded her for a moment without his glasses and then regarded her again with them on. You wish to say something? He added. Connie nodded. I've got a dependent, she said again. There's no one to look after him. Is it your husband? The magistrate asked. Is he an invalid? No, sir, he's quite all right. That is to say that I don't actually have a husband. Again a twitter, and again the usher upped on his toes. Then who is this dependent? He's a canary. This time it was more than a titter in the whole of the court. It began somewhere with a loud guffaw and broadened into a general murmur of laughter. The magistrate rapped on his desk. My orders have been disregarded, he said. Usher, clear the court. Next morning, Mrs. Josser received a cheap-looking government envelope containing a letter in a ragged, unreliable hand like a child's. It was on the notepaper of Holloway Prison. Dear Mrs. Josser, it rang. Owing to a slight misunderstanding, I shall be here for 14 days. Please ask Mrs. Vizzard on no account to let the room, which I will be requiring. Tell her the rent will be attended to prompt on my return. Also, please look after Duke. His water will need cleaning. The birdseed packet is in the top drawer of my hairbrush, along with my hairbrush. Give him enough to cover a penny. Please tell Mrs. Vizzard it's only a fortnight or sooner if I can get solicitors. If it gets very cold here, please have Duke down with you. Again, thinking of you and apologising you and for bothering you and hoping that you and Mr. Josser are well yourself. Yours truly, Connie. P.S. Please on no account let Duke out of the cage, even if he asks. He's very uncertain. Tell him we'll stretch our wings together when I get home. And that's the end of that. That's the end of that chapter. I just need to have a pause because it's so funny. Oh my goodness. Oh, that is so funny. TurboStream says, I started to watch the film and got to that bit and stopped watching it. I didn't want to ruin the readings. No, this is the trouble. If you do watch the film, and I know some people have, it kind of ruins it because the reading is, I hope I'm reading it all right, but the book, the way it's written is just, the book is true to the film is true to the book. That is so, but the film is an hour and 20 or something. I can't remember how long it is, but the extra detail and the nuances and the characters and all of that from the book is great. I would, if you haven't seen the film, I would wait till we've done the book, then watch the film, because it has a different, it comes to life. It's really good. Oh dear. So That was all good. Hello, I've been listening. I don't know what they were talking about. I started to watch a wonderful expression, looking like yesterday's buttonhole. I must use it sometime. Oh yes, he has some classic expressions, doesn't he? Looking like yesterday's buttonhole. Oh, Dooley, I'd love to see you use that expression in a sentence, says Andrew Norris. Jen says, this is great, really funny. It is hilarious. Ben Reeve says, Warren Zenoff's song, The French Inhaler, is about his ex-wife. Includes the line, your face looks like something death brought with him in a suitcase. Oh, I see. Anne H says, I love it. I very much enjoyed the reading this book, having heard you mention it before, and it's great hearing it again now you're reading it to us. Thank you, Lee. Yeah, I mean, how are we doing? We got 15 minutes. We get to the end of the chapter. That's good. Chapter 6 is a short chapter, so we'll go through chapter 6. Films in the view later. Very characterful story. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the book. Excellent. So let's just do chapter 6, because it's only a couple of pages, and then I'll let you go. Chapter 6. They had finished with Mr. Puddy at the sorting office. With the pay packet, they gave him a little slip telling him that he wasn't needed anymore. To soften the shock of dismissal, however, there were a few lines in italics at the bottom of the slip to say that in case the Postmaster General should want Mr. Puddy to help him with the next Christmas rush, Mr. Puddy might in due course get in touch with him. Mr. Puddy took the pay packet and the slip with the philosophical detachment of a man who for years has been plunging in and out of employment like a porpoise. I don't know what a porpoise. So far as he was concerned, it was simply meant that this was another of those occasions when he was temporarily tail up in mid-air. It was 12 noon when the slip was handed to him. He'd been working only morning shifts ever since Christmas, and he told himself the best thing to do would be to go and get a bit of lunch. In success or failure, Mr. Puddy remained faithful to his food. He thought of the Marquis of Granby up the street, but he dismissed the idea because they never served enough pastry with the steak and kidney pie, and he'd already decided in his mind on steak and kidney. Then he thought of the Pillars of Hercules, but somehow nothing at the Pillars of Hercules was ever really hot. The Irish stew there came out with small eyes of fat like ice floes floating on it. A bit further afield there was the Rose and Crown, which had everything. Large chunks of pastry, soup so hot that men like Mr. Puddy who wore glasses had to keep taking them off and wiping them, and boiled syrup roll that swam lazily in a treacle sea. But the trouble there was the waitresses. They were overworked, and that really meant he would be kept waiting. Also, the waitresses had their regulars and reserved the best portions for them. Mr. Puddy had to be in a specifically good mood not to mind that happening. And somehow, today, he felt that might upset him. So in the end, he went to the White Rose eating rooms, just opposite. The time was 12:30 when he got there, and at 25 to 2 he emerged. He was replete and a contented Mr. Puddy. What he would have liked best would have been to have loosened the boots, removed his collar, and have 40 winks. A sense of duty came over him, however. A sense of necessity. There was nothing for it but go straight away, off, all heavy and sleepy as he was, and start looking for something to fill in that awful, awkward gap while he was waiting for next year's sorting rush to begin again. There was always the labour exchange, of course, but Mr. Puddy felt himself a cut above that. The exchange was all right for men who were in grooves already, men like paper hangers and bricklayers and carpenters. But for a man of Mr. Puddy's sort, who had ranged the whole world of possible employment, it was mostly pretty fiddling stuff that the labour exchange had to offer. Nearly all their jobs meant clocking in, a practice that Mr. Puddy detested. The place that he was making for was Bert Bowman's employment agency in the High Street. It cost money to go to Bert Bowman's, but there it was the satisfaction of knowing that, having gone there, you had done the best by yourself. If Mr. Bowman didn't know about a job, there probably wasn't one going. But there was no fear that Mr. Bowman was bristling with jobs. There was no fear of that. Mr. Bowman was bristling with jobs. A small board at the foot of the stairs advertised a whole host of tempting occupations. Mr. Puddy mounted the stairs, his breath coming in short after luncheon gasps, and then he had to wait for nearly half an hour for Mr. Bowman to get back. While he was waiting, Mr. Puddy read the testimonials of satisfied clients and employers, which had plastered the place like wallpaper. The letters all seemed to have been drafted by the same pen, even though the handwriting was different, and all mentioning Mr. Bowman's name somewhere in the body of the message. So thank you, Mr. Bowman, for finding me my niche. Your fees were most reasonable. Or, I'm glad, Mr. Bowman, once more, to be able to thank you for helping me in my recent labour difficulty. Or, your fee, as always, Mr. Bowman, was strictly reasonable. Then Mr. Bowman himself came in. He was wearing a black coat and striped trousers, and a butterfly collar with a bow tie. He was brisk and very businessmanlike. "Take a seat, please," he said, even though Mr. Puddy was already sitting. "The fee is 5 shillings. Mr. Puddy counted out the coins and handed them over to the desk. Mr. Bowman, who had got his coat off by now, promptly shovelled the fee into an open cash bowl in the drawer. "Name and address?" he asked. Mr. Puddy told him. He was rather hurt that Mr. Bowman didn't remember him. He'd been there often enough. "What can I do for you?" he asked bluntly. Mr. Puddy explained his position carefully. He wanted something senior and responsible, something that brought good money and prospects with it. He was a man who could look after things, he said, and supervise other people. "Ever done any waiting?" Mr. Bowman demanded. "Public banquets, that sort of thing?" Mr. Puddy shook his head. "Mind living in?" Mr. Bowman asked. "House duties?" Mr. Puddy went back over the ground again and painted his own past life so impressively that he scarcely recognised it. It was like talking about a man of the same name who had been a success at everything. Mr. Bowman turned furiously through the pages of his ledger. "Cooking for 400 in a large institution? No good, no experience. Foreman in a big cabinet maker's? No good, no experience. Brewer's apprentice? No good, no connections. Animal trainer in a private circus? No good, no experience. Cutter in an artistic furrier's? No good, no experience. Sewing silks? No good, no connections. Optical lens polisher? No good, no experience. Wait a minute. Aha! His finger remained poised over one entry, rather far down the page where Mr. Puddy couldn't see it. He said again. "I have it." Mr. Puddy felt his heart pounding against all that lunch inside him. "What is it?" he blurted out. "Night watchman in a tea warehouse. Respectable, sober, live out." Mr. Bowman recited it to him. "Must be of large build, under 65. He paused and looked up sharply. "That all right?" he asked. I'm under 65, if that's what you mean," Mr. Puddy admitted grudgingly. His voice was flat and adenoidal. It made him sound as though he was grumbling even when he wasn't. "Salary £2.5 a week to the right man. References taken," Mr. Bowman continued. He picked up his pen again and began rapidly copying the address onto a gilt-edged card bearing the words, "With Bert Bowman's compliments to introduce. First week's salary comes here and we give you half back," he said. "After that, the prospects are what you make of them." He had risen out of his seat by now and was holding out the little card to Mr. Puddy. "Better get along straight away," he added, warningly. That sort of post doesn't remain vacant long. Is that all you've got to offer? He asked. Come and see me if you're not suited, was all he said. For Mr. Bowman had ceased to be interested in him. Another elderly man, slightly flushed from coming up the stairs, had just entered, and Mr. Bowman had fixed him with his horn-rimmed spectacles. Take a seat, Mr. Bowman was saying. The fee is 5 shillings. And that is the end of that chapter. I love it. I just love the characters. The characters are so well... They're so well drawn in a sort of old-fashioned way. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Porpoise, perhaps dolphins. Porpoises are similar in appearance to dolphins, but are more closely related to narwhal whales and belugas. Swimming unicorns, flipper. Anyway, I have come to the end of our readings for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed that today. That has been the best chapter so far. The characters are so beautifully drawn and the writing is so eloquent and so simplistic compared to Tickner Edwards, who seemed to be trying incredibly hard. This just flies off the page. I really love it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you tomorrow at the same time. Well, at 4 o'clock, not the same, not at 5, obviously. And we will commence the next section. Anne H. says, yes, I mean to be the word he was questioning. Most people recognise dolphins before porpoises. Oh, right, yes. Anyway, there we go. Have a good one, and I will catch up with you anon. I'm going to light the essay and get some food going and edit up tomorrow's video so that we have a video to show you, a bit of a fun video with the lovely Julia, little Joe, and myself up on the Downs. So there we are. Good stuff. Take care, and arrivederci for now. Bye-bye.